My heart like you do, and I could search for all eternity long and find there is none like you, there is none like you.
And to all the mothers, I say Happy Mother's Day. I'm in a sermon series, and so this is not going to really be a Mother's Day sermon. And if you were looking forward to one, I apologize. But this morning, preaching in our sermon series on moving forward, my sermon is entitled Challenges to Accept. When I think of challenges, one of the things that comes to mind is this story. It took place back in 1964. It was during what happened in Borneo during the confrontation between Malaysia and Indonesia. A group of Gurkhas from Nepal. Now, Gurkha are best known for their history of bravery and strength in the Indian Army, in their Gurkha regiments, and in the British Army. And they were asked if they would be willing to jump from transport planes into combat against the Indonesians if the need arose. The Gurkhas had the right to turn down the request because they had never been trained as paratroopers. And the story goes like this. The Gurkhas usually agreed to anything. But on this occasion, I lost my tongue. If you find it, please don't step on it. They provisionally rejected the plan. The Gurkhas did. But the next day, one of their NCOs sought out the British officer who made the request and said to him that he would like to discuss the matter further. And that they were prepared to jump under certain conditions. Well, what are they? The British officer said. The Gurkhas told him that they would jump if the land was marshy and reasonably soft and no rocky outcrops, because they were inexperienced in falling. The British officer considered this and said that the dropping areas were most certainly over jungle areas and there wouldn't be any rocky outcrops. So that seemed all right. Was there anything else? Yes, said the Gurkhas. They wanted the plane to fly as slowly as possible and no more than 100 feet high. The British officer pointed out that the planes always did fly as slowly as possible when dropping troops. But to drop from 100 feet was impossible because the parachutes would not open in time from that height. Oh, said the Gurkhas, that's all right then. We'll jump with parachutes anywhere. You didn't mention parachutes before. Now that's someone that's willing to accept a challenge. I believe we're also challenged in Philippians chapter 3, verse 14, verses 13 and 14. And there we read Paul writing to the Philippian church, brothers, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting that which was behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Pressing toward the goal. Early yesterday morning, I sat there in my recliner in front of the TV set to watch Dave running in the mini marathon, and Chris and Dan. I was with them in spirit. And boy, there were so many people there. Some estimated like 90,000 to run this little mini marathon. And they started off, and it was exciting to see the people take off at the beginning of the race. And as they were running across the starting line, the people were talking and giving commentary and talking about the different stages. And they were always going back to the finish line. There were still people taking off from the finish line. 30 minutes later, there were still people coming across, not finish line, the starting line. Still taking off to start the mini marathon. And an hour and 3 minutes later, the first person crossed the finish line. Some guy from Morocco. And it was an exciting thing to watch. I got tired just watching it. Whew. Honey, bring me a drink. I'm hot from watching this marathon. So, my congratulations to those who participated. That was a challenge that they prepared for, they conditioned themselves for, and they started off, and I'm assuming, I didn't actually see it, I'm assuming that they finished it. Okay. We have challenges to face too, as a church and as Christians. And one of the things we need to ask ourselves is, which way are we moving? We're either moving forward, or we're standing still, or we're falling behind. We're either moving forward, or we're standing still, or we are falling behind. We are one of those categories. That saying is true for churches. It is very easy to become compliant, to become comfortable. But when we become comfortable and complacent, it's a prelude to standing still. And once we stand still, guess what happens? When someone stands still in a marathon, what happens? Everyone else passes them by. And we begin to fall behind. Paul believed in moving ahead. Paul believed in moving ahead, like the PowerPoint should be moving ahead. At this time, thank you. Paul believed in moving ahead. It is the only way to avoid stagnation and failure in our Christian lives. We were just reading in our Sunday school text today about the fruits of the Spirit, and we're supposed to have the fruits of the Spirit in our lives, but the Scriptures actually say in 2 Peter chapter 1, in verse 5, that we should be adding to our lives these fruits of the Spirit in continuing effort. We should be growing in these things. We should be persevering in these things. Because if we do not as Christians, then we stagnate as Christians. Have you ever been around water that was stagnant? Kind of nasty. You know what it's good for? Mosquitoes. You don't want to be around stagnant water. It stinks. You know what? Christians that are stagnant in their spiritual life, they have a tendency to spiritually stink. They're not good for the health of the church, and they're not healthy themselves. They need to get moving. And a church that is stagnant begins to stink. We have to press on, press toward the goal. Paul believed in moving ahead. As a church, we need to think about what it takes to move ahead. We must never be satisfied with who we were in the past. Now, if you're just visiting with us today, and I referred to it in my last sermon, we celebrated 150 years anniversary last year. 150 years, and we had people that we hadn't seen in a long time come. We had pictures on the walls. We had relics from the past. It was a fantastic celebration. It was neat to see what had been accomplished over that 150 years. But what I am more concerned about than what we have accomplished over 150 years is what we are going to accomplish next year.